Yo, everybody, welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the guy who puts together the Eisner winning, I wrote down Eisner nominated, that's embarrassing for me, Panel by Panel, the YouTube video series Strip Panel Naked, and the podcast Letters and Lines, as well as the letter of comics like Peter Can, Thunderbolt, Red Sonja, Lone Ranger, and more. It's Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. Thanks for coming on, Haas.
Hi, thanks for having me a second time. So it's an honor. It's a genuine honor.
I have to ask, though, like, I just did a big list of things. Did I miss anything? I was trying to see if there was anything else you were doing, and I feel like there probably is, but it's so hard to keep track.
Yeah, I mean, that's mostly everything. We're doing some kind of panel by panel, little sort of separate book things as well, but that's all part of the panel by panel thing. So yeah, I mean, that's everything.
You do a lot. I'm going to be honest. You do a lot.
Yeah, I like to work. I just like things to. I like to have things to do. When I get bored. The problem with getting bored is I think of new things to do.
Yes.
So I try not to be bored too often, because then I create more work for myself. So it's not like a good. It's good to be bored, but it's like, for me, it's if I do that, I'll leave with like 5 new ideas for things, and I'll just waste my time doing those.
That's interesting. So it's like your brain is trying to fill a vacuum both in the short and long term by coming up with more things for you to do. It's like your brain is conspiring against your free time.
Yeah. I used to have loads of free time, but I really don't know what I did with it. I think I just played like a lot of Madden, and so it's probably for the best. I'm not like spending money on Ultimate Team or anything like that anymore. So that's probably like quite a good thing.
Do you feel so? Like tonight, I've made like actual plans for myself to play Shadow of the Colossus on the PS4. It's like I've freed time for myself so I can do that. But the weird thing is like sometimes I find that I feel guilty if I'm using my time in that way, and it's I don't remember feeling like that. Is that something? is that a feeling you ever get when you're doing stuff that is like quote unquote wasting time?
Yeah, it's really bad, because it's only usually if I'm doing stuff like entirely by myself, like if I'm watching TV or something, like if I'm just watching a show that only I'm watching and not my partner. So if I'm just watching it, I'm thinking, like, I usually tend to slip into the sort of mind frame of like, I could also just be working though, like at the same time as watching this. So which I know is not the same. It's not the same thing just to sit down and enjoy watching something. But yeah, my brain does that. I'm watching Dark at the moment, though. Ooh, and I'm only good. I'm only in like a couple of episodes in, but it's it's subtitled. So I've tried watching it while working with the English dub, but the English dub is genuinely quite awful. So that's one thing that is really making me stop working to watch it, because I need to like read it.
Yeah,
and I can't do that while I'm working on other things. So I think maybe I need to get into more foreign television.
Or you could just learn German.
Or learn, but then if I learn German, I can work at the same time. So that I don't, I ideally a language I have no interest in.
Okay,
so
yeah, that
German apparently fits that bill.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Panel by Panel. You're again Eisner winning digital comics magazine. Fair statement. I always wonder what to call it exactly, but so I have to start with like a regional thing. So you're in England currently. The Eisners are in San Diego Comic-Con. Were you even awake when you won?
Yeah, I woke up to find out, because this like the most exciting thing that has happened to me all year. So I think I woke up at I think it was like 4:00 in the morning.
Oh boy!
And one of our regular writers, Tiffany Babb, she was there, and so I got like a couple of DMs. So I woke up and I got like a couple of DMs from her just saying like, she was there and stuff, and you just say she was chatting to people and things like that. So I was just like, oh, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And then, so she was like, oh, we're up next. And I was like, oh, this is very exciting. Because last year I also did the same thing, and it was much less exciting because we didn't win.
Right.
But it was, so she just sort of stopped replying to me, and I was like, oh no, this is horrible. And then I saw, because we joint won the award with Alter Ego.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw that they'd been announced as the winner, and I was like, why did I wake up for this again? Like, this was just the same upset feeling as last year. I was like, why have I? And then it came up because I was following, I think it was like Heidi's Comics Beat thing. She was like live tweeting the awards, and then it came up that we joint won, and I was like, oh, well, that's nice. that's better. But then I also looked around the room, and Helen was asleep, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I'll just have to go to bed now. So, but also it's very much like a comic awards. The Eisners are like only interesting to the people who were nominated, and maybe just the sort of people that read comics, and anyone else, it is a hard sell for them to be interested in it at all, which is what I found. Like, other people are like, that's cool, but also no one has like any frame of reference for it if they aren't interested in comics. And so it's a very like it's not the same as like getting nominated for like an Oscar or something where just a regular person will be like, oh, that's crazy. For an Eisner, it's like you have to explain what it is, and then once you've explained what it is, there's sort of that look of like, oh, okay, well, good for you. You're like, okay, thanks. So it's really not like as big a deal, I think, as one could make it sound. I mean, it is a big deal. Like it's a really big deal, but it's very humbling the moment you try and explain that to literally anyone else.
No, I know. When Multiversity Comics was nominated, I think in 2014, I was one of the main editors there, and I remember trying to explain it to people, and I would always fall into the shorthand of just saying Comics Oscar, and right. People would just be like, "Oh, okay," and I'm just like, "That still didn't work, did it?" No, it didn't. It's still about comics. But I remember because we lost, obviously, we lost to CBR actually. The funny thing is basically every person who wrote for the site, besides the editor-in-chief who was at the actual awards, we were all on like Google Hangouts drinking and just being like completely ridiculous. And it was funny because by the time we actually lost, I think I had like an entire bottle of champagne that I saved for celebrating and like a very large beer. And so we were just completely, everyone was just lost to the world by the time that happened. We were like, oh, whatever, let's just keep hanging out on Google Hangouts. It was actually really nice. If I was just watching it normally, I probably would have been really bummed out losing, but
Yeah. The first year was a bit like that. The first year was like a bit like, this is really exciting, but I'd already I'd sort of accepted. Like again, Tiffany was there the previous year, and so we were chatting. We sort of had accepted together that we weren't going to win, and so that was an easier blow. And then this year we'd sort of accepted again that we weren't going to win. So I think if as a British person who's sort of constantly sort of pessimistic, so if things go wrong, it's like, oh, okay, well, prepared for that. So if things go right, it's like that's quite sweet. Can I make a quick correction? I said it was Alter Ego. It was Back Issue that we drew this year.
Oh, okay. So I do want to ask about like some of the nitty gritty stuff on panel by panel, because I find this stuff really interesting. I mean, I'm doing sketched and off panel, so I'm like constantly trying to keep those plates spinning, trying to keep the content flowing. Like what is do you actually have like do you have like a structure for yourself on how you keep these issues going forward, like this month, and also continue to work on stuff down the line? Like, how do you manage all that? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, it's the past few issues I've been, I think probably, well, most of this year, I guess I've been a bit better structured, which has been helpful. So I've been working a lot more on advance. I mean, the problem is sort of the thing with I suppose I say magazine publishing, but it's not really publishing. We're sort of online publishing, but I want to work in advance as much as possible, but then also leave enough open for that if things kind of arise or kind of pictures come in that were unexpected. They've still got room for them. So there's kind of, I try, but at the moment I'm trying to just get as many things kind of in place for the future as possible. So like the back end material for the magazine is less focused on the sort of feature comic. So that sort of thing I can kind of plan a few months in advance and get people to kind of like pitching essays and things like that a few months in advance. And for the feature books, I've been lucky in that I've kind of had a good idea of what I'd love to feature in advance, but now we're running up to the end of that, so now the panic's going to stay. But yeah, it's around the feature stuff is mostly just things that I'm interested in, I suppose. So it's just things that I'm either reading or following, or kind of new things coming out that I'm particularly interested in. And so from that, now we've built up kind of a base of writers, so I can kind of get in touch with people I know whose sensibilities kind of might suit that comic, and put the kind of feelers out for if they want to pitch that sort of thing. But yeah, it's mostly just trying to work in advance. So like September's issues out in a couple of weeks from when we're recording this, and I've got like almost everything in at the moment, so it just needs laying out. And then October's issue, we've got pieces that should be coming in soon, and then November's issue we already know what we're covering, so I've got feelers out for stuff for that. So it's just working as much it's just working as much in advance as possible. It makes me feel happier, just because there's a lot of stuff, like you're right, there's like a lot of things to worry about at any one moment. So yeah, it used to be when I first started, it was kind of like literally rolling every 30 days, like a couple of days before the issue was out, I'm still sweating, like getting things done. Whereas now I'm trying to be a lot better about having a draft ready like a few days before the magazine comes out that I can kind of refine and tweak, rather than literally like the night before / day of stressing because it's not ready. But also I think that comes with like it having a bit more having more issues and people having heard of it a bit, and therefore, willing to kind of invest time into it a few months in advance, and not kind of needing it to prove itself a bit more now, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah.
That makes it easy.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's like, it is really tough. Like sometimes when you're trying to create content really far out and you're telling people like, they're asking, like, oh, when's this going to run? And I'm like my first pieces that I was writing for the new version of Sketched, I was like, probably June, and I was starting in January, and they're like, what? Right. I'm just like, I'm sorry, this is just kind of how it works, because it's like sometimes you need a lot of runway to get this stuff together. But have you ever seen the episode of the new version of Battlestar Galactica 33?
I watched like there was like this no. I watched there's like a movie one, right?
There was like the mini series that led up to it, and then there was this.
I want to say I've seen the first of the mini series, maybe, but don't me on it.
Well, there's this one episode called 33 in which like the Cylons are chasing after the humans, and basically the premise of it is every 33 minutes the Cylons return, no matter where they jump, and so it's about them trying to keep getting ready for the jump while trying to figure out how they're tracking them. But anyways, it's like, but every 33 minutes they'll start this clock again and it counts down. And so when you said that early on, you were just like, okay, I'm done with this issue. And then it's like the clock starts again. I'm just like, I imagine you're effectively being chased by Cylons, except for being chased by Cylons as deadlines.
But yeah, there's like a really nice week, which is, so the week after it comes out, from like the Thursday to the start of the next month, essentially, because they've been coming out at the end of the month for the past sort of few months. That week is like, I almost don't think about the magazine at all, and that's the only time in the month where I don't think about it. But that week is really, really nice. That's like a really solid. But then also that week's filled up with like lettering and other things. So it's not like a rest. It's not like a holiday week, but it's like a panel by panel holiday week. So yeah, there is like a really nice chunk of time where I just don't have to worry about it for a bit.
So I did want to ask about, putting all the features together and everything, because one of the tricky parts is like, so you have panel by panel, you have strip panel naked, you have all kinds of, you have lettering. So you're living the comic life very heavily. Like you have to, to a certain degree, I have to imagine, continue finding time to actually read comics to be able to like keep these features going. So like, do you actually make time to ensure that you're reading comics while all this is happening, so you can kind of, I don't know, keep that pipeline going? Or like, I guess this kind of ties back into the ultimate question of like, where do your the feature books come from? Like, are these all from pitches at this point, or is it stemming from your own reading?
Yeah, it's all stuff that I read. So I don't have time that is necessarily set aside, but like I've got like a big, because almost all my reading now is digital. So I've just got like my big Comixology like smart list thing of pressure that I'm just trying to get through. So I have a mix of like, I only maybe read like a handful of single issues every month, but I try and do like a lot of trade reading. But there's just certain stuff like Spider-Man Life Story was just like a thing I was super, super excited about when it was announced. And so that was something that I was following, and I was just really wanted to write about that. So yeah. It was just like, I was just so thankfully everyone said yes. And And same for like Pretty Deadly. That was a book that was like one of my all-time favorite comics. And then that when I saw that was announced as coming back in September, that was just a perfect, because I had September open, so that was like a perfect opportunity to do that. So it is like we've never done like a feature book that is not something that I'm just already like
Jazzed
that I'm
about.
already reading. Yeah, yeah. Because otherwise it's hard to I don't think I could work on it for like, I say 30 days, but at the moment it's more like 60. I don't think I could work on it for like a couple of months and like edit all these features and write pieces and do the interviews as well, because we tend to do these quite long interviews. I don't think I could like actually do that if it was not something I was already interested in. So yeah, so even if it's like a book that hasn't come out yet, or it might be the creative team. So like the book we're doing for October, that was something that I was excited about before I read it, just on the basis of who was making it, and people that I was very, very excited about. And like when we did Eve Stranger earlier in the year, I adore Philip Bond, so I was just super, super excited to have something with Philip Bond. So that was again sort of before I read it, we seen the thing announced and was like, that's something I think we need to cover in some way. But usually it's that kind of like basis. Like if it's not something that's come out already, it might just be a case of like, how can we feature this thing? And if I get a chance to read it, then that might develop into like, we could talk a lot about like why this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like as I said, if it's not something I'm already reading, I don't think we could spend that much time doing it.
It's really tough to fake enthusiasm. I'm not saying that you don't appreciate like a lot of the books that people pitch you, but it's just like if you don't have like some semblance of interest already rooted in the book, like you said, it would be really difficult to dedicate 60 days and try to like generate all these features and do that big interview that you have. I mean, it would lead to an inferior product, I have to imagine.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, also it's like it's quite hard. I think it is probably quite hard to pitch features, especially like this year where I've been trying to work so many months in advance, because I'm kind of thinking like, so now I'm thinking like, what are we covering January, February? And that's probably quite an early cycle for people who would then be like promoting their book. Because I've had times where people have kind of pitched stuff and I've been like, well, I haven't got space for like 3 or 4 months at this point. And by that stage, it's like, I don't know if you're still going to be on your heavy promotion cycle for this book. You might be thinking about something else. So I just think overall, it's like the past 2 years has been me leading it with what am I interested in, and who else might be interested in this sort of thing. And I think it's worked out as an okay formula to kind of carry on with so far.
It's interesting because I wouldn't have thought of this, but it totally seems like it's the case. It's almost like you can be affected by the standard comics promotional cycle. Like it's, because comics generally speaking are, announced 3 months, or they have the solicited 3 months out, and then they get promoted through that whole window until they're released. And then quite often promotion kind of dies off. And it's it's almost like once you escape that, maybe people are a little bit less interested in this kind of thing. But you have featured a lot of books that are much further in your run. I guess that,
Yeah, that's true.
Typically when it's that case, it's like books that have pretty significant and long-term collaborations, like you did The Wicked and Divine, you did Giant Days, you did Criminal, you worked with Brubaker and Phillips and everything like that. So it's like, I don't know, but I guess I wouldn't have thought of you being affected by that, because it just feels like Panel by Panel is not, it is promotional, but it also feels like if somebody is going to buy the issue, it's at least partially because they're already interested in the book that's being featured. Do you find that to be the case?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think, and even like with the things that have been running a while, like even Life Story, we did sort of at the end of its run, essentially. Like we did that to sort of launched with issue 6,
right?
And Wicked and Divine we did with the sort of penultimate issue, or just before the penultimate issue. So that was 5 years or whatever down the line. I suppose that like I'm not sure how beyond sort of anecdotal evidence, because it's not like we're tying into a sales feed for a retailer or anything. So I only have anecdotal evidence, but we have people that have written in that are like fully, I really only buy the things that are kind of interest me in terms of the feature comic. But then we also have people that are like, even if I'm not reading the feature comic, I'm reading those features. So there's probably a line. There's a Venn diagram somewhere of people that read it no matter what, people that only read it if they're already like kind of like catching up on or reading the kind of feature, and somewhere in the middle where someone might not be interested but will still be reading that feature, and hopefully maybe will pick up the book if it interests them enough afterwards. So it's hard. That sort of information is hard to say, which also makes us a difficult. I think probably also makes us a difficult outlet in terms of like on like publisher PR side, because we're not unique so much, but like our model is fairly unique. So it's also I think it's like a hard descriptor or a hard thing to explain, which is why I think like stuff like the Eisner is particularly helpful, because then it sort of proves that it has some kind of merit, hopefully, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have that air of legitimacy to it then. I mean, not that you didn't before, because, a lot of people are always touting panel by panel, but at the same time, it's like you can point to that and be like, this is a thing. I always find, it's funny, when off panel is generally speaking what I wouldn't describe it as a promotional podcast. And I actually tell most marketing and PR people that I'm just up front, and I'm like, this is not generally a marketing and PR or like a promotional podcast. So I'm not really going to be just focused on only talking about this book that you're going to have, that you want me to talk about. And it's funny because a lot of times I find that some marketing PR people really love that and like respect that, and other people just stop responding to my emails. So I'm like,
I do think the like comics marketing is it's so odd. I find it such a strange thing. Like, this is something that I think I'm pretty sure we had done an episode on something about this with a ditcher on Letters and Lines. But this idea of like comics marketing feels like a sort of thing that was sort of designed years and years ago.
Yeah,
and everyone is so busy doing it that like everyone's workload is so heavy that no one's really had time to like kind of step back from it and like figure out a different way of thinking about how to sell comics to people. Because there's so many like strange sort of oddities. I think like for example, like you'll see because previews works and you need to order a book like 3 months in advance or whatever, you'll see stuff like the preview pages for like the second or even maybe third issue of a series that has not even had its first issue out yet.
Right.
And I get that, but I'm like on another level, I'm like, I don't know who that's for, because if you're interested in the book, you probably don't want to spoil ahead, and if you're not interested in the book, I don't know why you're looking at preview pages for issue 2 or 3 or anything like that. So there's these kind of like sort of things that have sort of stuck by, I think. And yeah, I don't know. And I have no answer for marketing comics. I don't know if that wasn't heading anywhere sort of particularly clever, but I find that whole process of marketing comics really sort of oddly interesting. Which is why I did that trailer. I did like a trailer comic on Twitter a few months back to when we were sort of promoting Killer Groove, because I just felt like just to try something different to see if that would get anyone's interest. And then I've seen a few of them since, which has been quite fun. But yeah, I find the promotional aspect of comics strange, because I also would have absolutely no idea how to promote a comic. I don't even know. I don't know where I was going with that. I just got really excited about the oddities of comics and marketing.
It is very odd. I mean, I liked your point, because I've always kind of associated as it's like a story that's passed down from generation to generation of marketers, and they're just like, oh, how do I do this job? And they're like, oh, do it this way. And you're just like, has anyone wondered whether or not there's a better way to do this? Because, my day job is in marketing, and a lot of times I look at this stuff and I'm just kind of blown away by it, because it's, I don't know. I mean, like you said, basically, it's like there's got to be a better way to do this, but at the same time, it's like I've never sat down to figure that out, because it's not my job to, and I don't have any comics to sell or anything like that. But I don't know. It is a really fascinating topic. I actually have somebody writing a piece for Sketched about comics marketing and how that whole world works. So I'm going to be interested to see what they come up with. But I do want to ask about one thing that really interests me about your workload, and that's you have panel by panel and you have Strip Panel Naked, but Panel by Panel also has Strip Panel Naked, right, the YouTube channel, and then you have Strip Panel Naked in the magazine. So you have effectively two kind of critical homes, so to speak, where you're analyzing comics. And that, I mean, I have the same bifurcation. It can lead to problems where you have to figure out where you're creating content for. And it's like, sometimes it's like you almost have to sacrifice one for the other. Does that become a problem for you?
It's only happened once, where I did because obviously the cover feature of the magazine sort of dictates the topic. Well, not the topic, but the comic sort of to analyze for the magazine. So it's only happened once where I wrote a Strip Panel Naked episode like for the YouTube on Little Bird, and then it turned out that we were doing Little Bird as an issue. Because I'd been given like a preview copy by Aditya, and I just fell in love with it straight away. And so I started writing something about it, made a whole bunch of notes about this episode, and I wrote this episode down. And then I was like, it might be really fun to do this as a panel by panel thing. So I sort of went through Aditya to see if the team would be interested, and they said yes. And then I found myself thinking, well, I could just use this for the magazine, which would save me a little bit of work. And then once I looked at it, I even laid it out actually. I laid it out for the magazine, and I looked at it and I was like, it's so obvious that I wrote this to speak and not to read. Mm-hmm. And so I scrapped it and then went back to the drawing board and rewrote a piece for the magazine. And then I'm pretty sure I did that as an episode anyway. I recorded it as an episode still. So I did it. I think I covered Little Bird on the. Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I did that as an episode. So that's the only time where it's sort of like there has been a crossover. Otherwise, I don't think much of what we've covered in the magazine has necessarily Isla. I think we did it on Isla. Actually, there's been a couple of times, but I think they've been separate occasions. Little Bird's been the only one where it's ever crossed my mind of how to of using one from one side, from the video side into the magazine side. Otherwise, they tend to be fairly separate operations. Like I think about them very, very separately.
But I bet you probably also almost, I'm not saying completely separate audiences, but, having one being a paid thing and the other one being a free thing. I mean, I bet you have an audience that's slightly different for both. Also, some people don't like video or some people don't like reading. Reading can be exhausting. So it's like you probably have a lot of overlap, but also probably a shocking amount of separation between those audiences.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's like a whole bunch of people that probably read the magazine that have probably never seen the YouTube series. I would probably heavily bet on that. I think I had one time where someone was reading the magazine and sent me an email. And this was a few issues into it, and I think they're a subscriber. And they sent me an email a few issues into it going, I didn't even realize. He's like, I don't know why it took me so long to realize, but you're the person that does the YouTube thing as well. So I think there's the magazine is very, very different. I think, my bit of the magazine is obviously similar to the YouTube series, but I think the rest of the magazine is quite a lot different. Mm-hmm. Than Strip Panel Naked on YouTube. So I think, the crossover is quite different. I think that the one thing I would like to do more, because my sort of speed on the YouTube series has slowed down, and I'm trying to do sort of 2 a month, where originally I was doing 4 a month, which maybe rather than I'd like to do more is probably saying that that's a better, more sustainable pace. But that's the one thing I'd love to try and have more time to do is to do more episodes, because that's like one of my favorite things is making that series. And it does bum me out a little bit. I only get to do 2 episodes a month. But even then, that's almost a struggle now. So I think adding more to the workload is probably not a good idea. But I'd love to do more of those episodes. I have a lot of fun making those episodes.
It does seem like that marries a lot of your interests together, because you do have the film background, and then you also you love comics and you love talking about the storytelling. So it's kind of like a perfect fusion of your interests. Now, if you could just work in like Ezekiel Elliott into it, it would probably be even better.
I thought you were just going to end on, and you love talking. So, yeah.
Well, you do have such a good voice.
Yeah, I just need to get some cowboy stuff in there.
Yeah, exactly. Just randomly throw in cowboy stars randomly on the page and be like, where'd that come from? Be like, it's a variant. Don't worry about it. So I did want to ask about the redesign. So why did you redesign panel by panel? Was that was with the year-end issue, right? Like the...
it was did a semi, I suppose, fairly heavy redesign with December last year. Mm-hmm. That was because, do you know what's bad as well, is I got told off for this the other day, but I was making a whole bunch of notes about how to redesign it again. And my partner was like sort of telling me to stop doing that. That was actually because that issue was the first sort of break we'd had in a while, because it was a year end one, so it wasn't a particular feature book, so it was just people writing about what their favorite comic was from the past 12 months, right. And so we were working on that from I think I was telling people about it the end of September, and we probably got pieces in. Sort of first pieces were probably in about sort of late October, early November. So I had like a really long time to work on that issue compared to the rest of them from that year. And so what I found I was doing was like I'd lay them out. And then when I'd go back to the magazine to lay out like another piece a little bit later, I'd start sort of playing around with that and sort of rejigging it. And then we had the Steve Orlando Riley Rossmo interview in the back of that, and they were very heavily talking about a lot of imagery in their conversation with each other. So I wanted to get a lot of that in. I was trying to figure out like a nice way of doing it, and just slowly developed from having too much time to put the magazine together, really. And the problem with that was that like when I started doing like January, February, etc., I had less time than we had in that December issue, but I wanted it to look the same. And so it suddenly became a lot more work than it used to be. But I think it's worth the, like when I look at it now, when I look back at some of the older issues, which are very minimalist. I still think they're nice, but I much prefer the way it looks now. And I think it's a bit more of a kind of like an interactive experience, and that's also been the feedback, as people have been saying for sort of the redesign issues, that it is like a lot more interesting to see the kind of imagery play off against the text a lot more than it was doing previously. So I'm glad I did it, but I'm now sort of getting restless and thinking about redesigning it. But it probably won't be for a while if that ends up happening.
Do you just like change your like fashion style like constantly, just like every 3 months, just like it's time for something new Hassan coming out?
No, I wear the same clothes all the time. It's just like a check shirt or a floral pattern, and I'm done, and a pair of jeans. So, but it's just when I see it, it's like I think because you spend so long with it, and so I probably get bored of it quicker than anyone else does. Because each issue I've read like a whole bunch of times, and so I've seen it a whole bunch of times, and you've seen what goes into making it. So it's like you want to constantly be sort of trying to push it, but also you have to be conscious about the fact that there are readers, and they aren't as bored as it by as in the design as I am. Not that I'm bored of the new design, but like I'm already feeling like how I could tweak it.
Sure.
But yeah, it's being conscious about like what is just you being restless, what's just you kind of like tweaking things for the sake of tweaking things, and what's you kind of making good decisions. And so yeah, lettering has a similar thing. So it's just knowing what the drive is, like why are you doing this? Is it a good drive, or is it just a sort of a restless one?
Yeah. I'm kind of mixed. I mean, like I love both, but the funny thing is like I really like clean things. Like I just like like the minimalist style really spoke to me, but I think the one that really convinced me was the criminal, that whole interview, and the way that you incorporated the art and in like script pages and stuff into that interview with them was really nice. Like it worked really, really well. And I was just like, oh, okay. Yeah. It was almost like the moment where it kind of like unlocked for me. But, I had a patron question, which is, they were wondering, panel by panel is a bit unique in that it is a paid PDF, not just articles on a webpage. What would you say are the advantages of that format?
Well, there's a few to me. I think a big one is that compared to say like a website, is I don't have to sell individual articles.
Oh yeah,
which is something that came out like a while into the magazine. It's sort of like probably about like middle of last year, I started realizing that what we're selling is a whole thing, as a whole magazine, and so it doesn't necessarily have to rest on the strength of just pushing each individual piece. That also has a downfall in that you don't have like the same. I don't think you can generate the same sort of like buzz. Like if there's like an article that suddenly all of comics Twitter is talking about, whatever, your panel by panel will never give you that. Which is, again, can be a bad thing, but also on the good side is that it doesn't rest on a single individual thing. It rests on the concept as a whole. And so if I can convince you that the magazine is interesting as a whole, you don't have to be wowed by every single piece in the magazine, and you don't even have to really read every single piece in the magazine, as far as I'm concerned, to get your money's worth out of it. So I think that's probably like that's probably the big one. But it also means that I can design stuff or lay things out in a way that I just would not be able to do online, or at least I personally wouldn't have the capacity to figure out how to do that online. So I can do those kind of like sort of visual heavy layouts and things like that that you wouldn't do online, and I can kind of pace out how you read an article in terms of what gets broken down on what page a lot easier than, again, I could do on a web page. So it's speaks to sort of like the design things that I like to do a bit more than I would have access to on a website. Does that answer the question?
No, totally. Yeah, yeah. This is super random, but have you ever? Do you know who John Boy is? JONBOIS.
No.
He writes, or he kind of writes for this site SB Nation, and he did this big thing a few years ago or a couple years ago called 17,776. And
I've seen it.
Yeah, my God, yeah,
incredible.
It's about the future of football, and he always does these like really cool things with like how websites can be laid out and how they can be futzed around with. And he did this one series called Breaking Madden, where he was just trying to break Madden. And it's an incredible series, which you should totally watch. He did it for an NBA game too, and he actually recently did a comic with this guy, and it was about the 2014 Dallas Mavericks, I think it was, and about how like they were like the one team that was able to like slow down like the title winning San Antonio Spurs that year. And he uses data and stuff on the webpage to like lay it out. But anyways, I mean, I'm not saying you need more design inspiration, but that dude, that guy is great. Amazing.
But I think that's what part of that is about making reading it more interactive.
Yes,
especially in an era where, and this is part of the panel by panel thing, which is sort of going against this, is in an era where like everything is vying for your attention. And much of it in kind of a very interactive way, is how do you make someone reading because they're really big articles as well.
Yeah.
How do you make someone read like 10,000 words or whatever in a way that isn't boring to them, no matter how interesting the subject matter is. And panel by panel, I think part of what is interesting to me about that is getting people away from distractions. So if you read that on a tablet or whatever, you hopefully you're not reading that like in a Safari browser where you've got loads of different tabs open and there's like adverts on the side and there's like other articles for you to click on halfway through the piece to draw your attention to something else. It's just a linear, pick the articles you want to read or whatever. But when you're reading them, it's just a linear experience of just going through this piece. And so I hope that's how people experience it. Do you know what I mean? Like sort of just not being distracted by that thing. But it's also why we're doing these panel by panel one shots, which are like sort of small pocket books, essentially long essays in a small sort of A5 book. And that was also a consideration of that. It's like, so if we're getting people away from distractions on websites and ads and all that kind of stuff, how do I still convince someone that like, even though you've sort of paid to read this thing, how do I convince you to read multiple thousands of words on something, and so there's little things that we're doing in the book design to try and engage someone to read a long form piece of criticism. So yeah, that's something that's like on my mind, but I suppose where I approach it differently than that, probably because I'm not smart enough to think like that, is like free of distractions and approachable text.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're talking to the guy who writes like 5,000 plus word articles like every week. So that is something that I suffer from. The good news is I don't have any ads to distract, but at the same time, it's like it's always a big ask. And so like the nice thing is like for something like 17,776 or panel by panel, you do have maybe more of an immersive experience than you would on a website, and that can change the reading experience. Are you able to say anything at all about the pocketbooks, or are you still like those are getting rolled out later?
Yeah, hopefully they'll be announced later this year. But the plan for them is so we're going to launch with 4, and we've got another 5 in the works that are currently being written. And so they're essentially sort of long essays, 10, 11, 12-ish thousand words, but broken down as a little A5 pocketbook, and all on a particular topic. So it might be like a retrospective on a creator's career and why, I don't want to say too much about it, but like a particular creator I'm thinking of, like why the moment in the spotlight sort of came as it did.
I know exactly who you're talking about based off of the images.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, maybe people already realize that if people have seen me tweeting about it. So we've got like one like that. We've got one that's kind of a history of Canada and comics in Canada and how that is replicated through its relationship with America, which is a really, really interesting piece. And we've got one which breaks down the first appearance of a character in the short story that they were in, sort of page by page, and talks about some of the sort of political context around that as well. And then the last one is a sort of almost strip panel nakedy sort of analysis of a style used in a sort of a fairly popular Marvel teen heroes comic book of the time. So they're all kind of a little bit different in what they tackle, and then the ones we've got coming up are things like like the presentation of motherhood in comics, sidekicks and sidekicks dying in comics, and why that's a thing, and sort of why that's a thing. So we've got like a big range of stuff that it's not dissimilar to the kind of writing you find in panel by panel, but just where an average panel by panel article might be somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 words. This is like 4 or 5 times that.
Right.
My goal is to have them in print so that you can pop them in your pocket and just read them wherever you are. And they're also designed to be super, super readable as possible. Even if you've got like 2 seconds, you can read some of this, and it will feel like a sort of a chunk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how best to describe that, but hopefully that gets people interested. But I think they're really, really good. I think they're really, really good. And so we've got 3 of them sort of laid out. We're just kind of doing final edit passes on that. A 4th one is finished and written. I just need to lay that one out. And as I say, yeah, we've got like a whole second wave in the wings that are currently being written.
That's awesome. I'm excited for those, especially because one of them is vaguely X-Men related. And
yes,
related. Yeah. when you like pop that one up on Twitter, it was like basically you just said Beetlejuice, and then like Zach from Xavier Files was like, "What's this?"
Well, it's like that was a really fun one because I mean none of them were written by me, right. I should say. So I'm editing them. And that one was such an interesting read because it was a sort of a period of history that I had little knowledge of because X-Men is not my forte.
Sure.
So reading that, I was like, I had a brand new. It was really good because it got me. I went back and started reading a couple of these runs that I discussed heavily in that, and I was like, I fully understand, like, because it's stuff that I tried to read before and never really cared for, and then once I sort of, as I was reading this context around it, like I completely saw it in a brand new light, which I'm hoping happens for other people as well. And I had a whole new respect for this stuff that I had little respect for before. Yeah. And so yeah, so it was really, really interesting in that regard. Super, super interesting.
So the last question I want to ask about panel by panel is related to the nature of like having a subscription based experience. And in like, I'm doing that right now with Sketched. It's a really interesting experience because like, I mean, I can't speak for you, but sometimes you can feel like pressure of trying to make sure things are good and worthwhile and that you're making things bigger and better because it's almost like you don't want to let subscribers down. Like, do you feel that? Yeah. And like, how do you manage that if you feel that? And like, this is not me treating you like a therapist. This is just a genuine question.
I was about to say we should start a support group. No, yeah, for sure. It's rough. And I think part of that is sort of feeds into that answer for the patron question as well, is when I want to see it as a whole thing. So that takes a bit of pressure off, where you can have an article that sort of is almost like I suppose a lot of the feature articles are like almost like supporting articles, and that they're all supporting each other. And so a lot of them are kind of playing off another one, playing off another one, playing off another one. And I've been trying to read a lot more magazines as research as well the past few months, and seeing that sort of thing a lot, where you might see something that's a little bit fluffier, and that you might think like, well, this isn't worth my entry fee. I was reading Empire magazine, which is really good for that sort of thing, for fluffy pieces. Mm-hmm. But it also backs up a lot of fluffy pieces. I think I talked about Empire last time we did this as well. But Empire backs it up with some genuinely kind of like in-depth writing. But what it does is it just kind of, whatever you're looking for, there's like a little thing in there, and it will push you through to the next piece. And so thinking of it as like an overall piece, I think helps me kind of like see the value, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But the other thing is also like trying to the balance is like, the balance is a really hard thing. This is me now I'm just like having a conversation in my head about the balance. But the balance for me is a really hard thing because you've also got the front stuff, which is the feature book, and then in panel by panel you've also got it's almost half and half balance. It's maybe a little bit shorter, but then you've got the second half, which is unrelated to the feature book. And so there is a natural acceptance that the feature book is the thing that might sell the issue to people that aren't subscribers. But also you've got this whole other half of the magazine that they may miss. even if they're not interested in Spider-Man life story or whatever. And so how do I then also try and promote that second half? Like we had a really cool Jimmy Olsen piece with Matt Fraction and Nathan Fairbairn and Steve Lieber and Clayton Cowles. That was not the feature issue, the feature piece for that issue, but I also want to sell it on the basis of that. That was like a really, really cool piece by them. And so it's like trying to make enough in there and enough variation that even if a subscriber gets a copy in their inbox and they're like, okay, you know what, I'm not reading that comic, that you're still going to get your, $3 worth of content from that second half. Which, now saying that out loud, sounds a bit like I'm putting too much content in it. But I think there is a balance of just making sure that there's something in there for everyone. I don't know if that was a really long sort of walk around answer, but there is. I think it's about a balance of content. It's about sticking to the principles of like, do I find this thing interesting, right? Like, and if I'm putting something together and I look back at that issue or that piece and I just don't think it's working or I don't think it's interesting, then how do I fix that? And I really like that editing process, working with writers as well. It's like getting that thing to kind of the perfect point. But yeah, so I think using yourself as a testing audience is a good sign. Is like if you get frustrated by something, even if it is after 4 times of reading it or whatever, and you still think that's not quite right, there's something I can do with that. It's kind of just pushing it to get it as perfect as possible. And then at least, even if people read it and go like, that's not for me, then at least I can feel satisfied that we did a good job anyway, though. Like, okay, so maybe that thing isn't for you. That's fair enough, but we still did a good job. It just wasn't to your taste.
Yeah. No, it totally does. And like the thing about it is like there's really, I mean, that is like the plus and the minus of like a subscription based thing is there's no way. It's almost by doing a subscription based product, you're almost making a tacit admission that this is not for everyone. I mean, I'm not saying that like,
well, it's elitist in the sense that there is a barrier immediately, and elitist in the sense that there is a monetary barrier. So you to be reading it, you have to be willing to spend $3 or whatever to access this thing in the first place, which is naturally sort of gatekeeping the material in some way.
Right. And like if let's say like Comic Book Resources came and said, I want to buy panel by panel and I want you to run it on our site. Mm-hmm. It would have to change. I mean, due to the fundamental nature of the internet, it would no longer be remotely the same. And that's the thing is like that's one of the interesting like pushes and pulls when it comes to the subscription based stuff is like quite often that's the only way that those things can exist. And it like it makes it better, but it also it puts an inordinate amount of pressure on like you, for example. I did want, this is kind of a random question, but like, so you do a lot of things. Do you have one that you consider your quote unquote, and I'm doing air quotes, job, or is it all of this, or is it one of these roles is your primary?
I think lettering feels more like specifically the job, because that's the one where I've got where I've got editors,
right? And other people are relying on you.
Yeah, panel by panel feels like a job because it has a deadline. I think Strip Panel Naked on the YouTube is the one that doesn't feel like a job, because it doesn't, even though I have like patrons and patron requirements and stuff, that's the one I think that doesn't have a deadline. So if like I don't get an episode of that out in time, which has happened numerous occasions, there's no one that's like going to send me like a really angry email, which is the only part of my month where that won't happen. So yeah, I mean, lettering probably feels like the job the most, but then when I'm doing it, less so, because it's just quite good fun. But like all the other stuff around it is a lot more jobby. Mm-hmm. And same with panel by panel, like actually making it and doing the editing process and stuff like that. But is like the fun part, and then the job part is the promotion, is the finding articles and commissioning articles and all that kind of stuff. So it probably depends on the time of the month.
Yeah. If you're lettering right then.
Again, not a great answer, but
I mean, I imagine it's like if you're lettering right then, it's like, this is my job. And then if you're working on panel by panel, you're like, this is my job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I want to talk about lettering to close. Well, before we get into some other stuff, you started lettering. It sounds to me like you were kind of like, I don't know, kind of like wooed into it to a certain degree. And it was like something that you got into, and then you end up really liking it. But what is the appeal of lettering to you in particular?
Oh, I don't. Oh, that's a good question. I like. I was saying to someone recently that it reminded me of like film editing, where you're at the end of the process, which means that you can sort of see everyone else's mistakes and then get angry at them, which is sometimes quite good fun. And it also means that you get to see the finished product first, which is also very much very, very good fun. You're like the first person that gets to read that comic, and no one can see the thing without you having done your work on it. And also, it's typically quite a less respected or like hailed part of the process. And also what it also means is that you can just do it by yourself, away from everyone for the most part, which is a nice way of working for me. So yeah, I think it just has like a nice combination of things that's just like design, storytelling, and being left alone, like all wrapped up into one role, which I'm a big fan of all three of those things.
Oh man, I'm feeling bad I have you on my podcast right now. I'm totally not leaving you alone. Well, I was reading an interview you did where you're talking about your lettering, and you were talking about, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can letter a book and approaches you can have. But I actually recently interviewed Darren Bennett, who's, a professional letterer and does some really great work. And he has the same approach to you, which is you're trying to match the line of the artist you're working with. Why is that the method that you approach? Because I know in that interview you specifically cited Clayton Cowles as working in a completely different way.
So, like, for me, it's just about trying to make it look like I'm not there. Because when you like read a comic and you see so you've got the line artist and then you've got the colorist, right?
Right.
And the colorist is also, in an ideal world, you look at that page and not go, oh, I see two different people working on this page, right? And so I don't want the letters to then be that. So I don't want the letters to then be, I can see one person working on that page in the line art and the colors, and then I can see this other person who's kind of put their stuff on top of that. So the perfect idea for me is that when someone looks at it, they just see one person having done everything, right? Mm-hmm. They just see one person having written it, having drawn it, having colored it, and having lettered it themselves. And so it's about making that as seamless as possible to the point where you don't notice the seams. Seamless, don't notice. Yeah, but where you don't see that, you don't see those different hands being on it, because the moment you do that, then you've taken someone out of the story. So as much as you can make as much as I can make the lettering become one with everything else, then that just means that when someone reads it, they ideally, hopefully, won't see those layers of process. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the premise of like Jamie McKelvey and Kieran Gillen's whole like faux cartoonist thing. It's like you're trying to achieve something that seems like one person did it together. It's like the Voltron of comic book creators.
But I think like, and they do that for like writing an artist, but that I do think that covers the whole gamut. That's everyone really.
Well, yeah, I mean, just look at the nominations for letterer almost every year for the Eisner Awards. It's pretty lousy with cartoonists, much to letterer's chagrin, I imagine. But I mean, it is interesting seeing that, because it's like you always, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of somebody who's normally on there. It's like if, Chris Ware, I think, has a new book this year. It's like Chris Ware is, I'm going to go ahead and guess that Chris Ware is going to be nominated for the Eisner for best lettering. And and that's a big part of the reason for that is kind of what you're talking about. It makes the whole thing feel more seamless. It is interesting though, because in monthly comics, it's almost, I don't know. I mean, it's like the homogenous look of lettering can lead to anything that's different feeling extremely outlandish for some. And
yeah, well, I mean, you've got house, like, I mean, Marvel's house style is not like my favorite style of lettering,
right?
But also I fully understand why you do that, because it's the same as like watching like a blockbuster and everything's orange and teal. Like there's a reason why they do that, just to make it accessible in some regard, right? Or it works. They know it works. It's like one less thing to worry about when you're pumping out like a whole bunch of comics every month. Mm-hmm. But also, I think when you start looking at indie comics, and I'm saying indie comics is basically anything that isn't Marvel or DC, although DC's style is much less, DC's lettering is much less house styled, is that you start to see a much broader spectrum, I think, anyway, a much broader spectrum of lettering styles.
For sure. Yeah, God, DC. They have, I don't know if you've seen anything with the Batman Who Laughs, but I think that the lettering style for that character is, I'm pretty sure, just trying to kill readers' eyes. It is really intense. It's like,
is that like the red on black or something?
Yeah, it's red on black, and it's just like,
right.
I don't know, man. That's tough to read. I'm going to be totally honest. But
I've seen a lot of complaints about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did want to ask specifically about Peter Cannon Thunderbolt #4 because that is a bird of a different feather when it comes to a comic. But it is a great comic. But did you? I don't know. I mean, did that issue particularly challenge you as a letter? And for listeners that don't know, well, I mean, would you like to walk through exactly what that was? It was effectively, it's hard to kind of explain. Go ahead.
No, that was like one of my that series is like one of my all-time favorite things that I've worked on. I still genuinely when I look back at it, I can't believe we did so much of the stuff we did in that series. But it's basically it's almost like a riff on like Watchmen in terms of like an alternate dimension Ozymandias kind of deal. But basically looking at Watchmen by saying like Watchmen, even though Watchmen is fantastic, like it's not the be all and end all of smart comics, and in fact a lot of what Watchmen does is taken from other things anyway. And one of those other things is Eddie Campbell's Alec comic. Mm-hmm. And so we did this issue 4, where the main character, Peter Cannon, falls into a different universe, and it's this kind of 80s British indie comic as drawn by Eddie Campbell, which Caspar Wingard does like an absolutely incredible job doing. And so Kieran had written in the script like, I'm aware that you're not getting paid enough to hand letter this. So maybe you want to get like a hand lettering font or something. But also, everyone was putting so much into that series that I couldn't bring myself to just put a font on it. So I hand lettered that whole issue, apart from Peter Cannon's dialogue, because it's sort of each version of reality has their own dialogue style in that. And so you kind of keep your own dialogue style as you travel through realities. And so, yeah, apart from Peter Cannon, who's got just like a normal sort of superhero comic book style, everyone else is sort of hand done. And so there's a lot of references to like Alec in there. There's like a couple of like sort of captions that have like fists and hands pointing from them and stuff, which were all hand drawn. And it was awful. I did it all in one night in like some kind of a weird fever dream where I just did it, and then I looked at it, and it took me a really long time. And I looked at it, and I thought, this might be the worst thing I've ever done. And I got really freaked out about it. And then I just, a sensible part of my brain kicked in, was like, just sleep first and then look at it in the morning, because I was like so close to just scrapping it and doing it again. And so I went to sleep, and I woke up, and I was looking at it. I was like, I can't tell if this works or not. And I showed it to my partner, and she looked at it, and she sort of said like, yeah, it looks pretty cool to me. And I was like, okay. And then I sent one page, I think, to Mary, Caspar, and Kieran, and they were like super excited about it. And I was like, oh, cool. And they were like, crack on. And I was like, I've done it. It's cool. It's all ready. I just wasn't sure if I was going to pretend like I'd only done one page and you all hated it. It was cool. I was going to move on. And so I made like a couple of amends on every single page where it just wasn't particularly neat or whatever. But yeah, it was just, that was so much fun. Like, it was so much fun. And I'm still surprised that Matt and Kevin, who are the editors on that, sort of let us get away with doing that. But yeah, it was such a fun issue. Like, that's just, I don't know if there's anything else that came out that month from a publisher of monthly comics, especially a superhero comic, that was anything close to what we did on that. I don't know if that's too much bravado, but I was genuinely really. So I think we did such a cool issue.
I think it's pretty safe to assume that no other superhero comic was hand lettered that month. So I think you definitely did your own thing. It's funny though, because I was like, did he hand letter this? I think so, but I don't know so, because like there's people find solutions for all kinds of things, and they can make things. I mean, it's like we're going to talk about sound effects for another thing I'm working on, but it's like a lot of times, like when you're trying to come up with solutions, when a letter is trying to come up with solutions for sound effects, it's like that's another time where you're really trying to match the line to what the line artist is doing, because you want to feel congruous with everything. So it's like, you can come up with solutions for anything digitally these days, it seems, but apparently this time you hand lettered it.
Well, I mean, it technically is digital in the sense that like I hand lettered it digitally.
Right.
But so I figured out like a thing to do my sound effects. I think on Red Sonja. I think the first time I did it was on Red Sonja issue 1, which would have been like the sort of sometime in 2018. I think late 2018. And so basically, I was just putting the art into Photoshop, and I was painting the sound effects in Photoshop, or drawing the sound effects in Photoshop to try and again mimic the line as much as possible. And And I figured out this kind of like little system with an iPad and a piece of software called AstroPad, which like makes the iPad into a drawing tablet, basically. So I was using that, and then I just realized I could do that with Photoshop and the hand lettering for Peter Cannon. I made like a little lettering guide, like lines, kind of like to space the words properly and everything like that. And then I just went at it for many, many hours.
Nice. It's funny. You mentioned Red Sonja. It's kind of funny. That's the Mark Russell one, right?
Yeah.
So the funny thing is I was at, and I probably shouldn't say this, but whatever. I was at Emerald City, and I was talking to Richard Pace about Second Coming, and he was like, "If you're excited about this comic, you should read Red Sonja." He's like, "It is the best thing that Mark has ever written," and I was just like, "Mark is really good at writing. Like that is a serious thing to say." Yeah. I mean, like everything he's written, I'm very fond of. I have not read Red Sonja. I have to admit. So eventually, though, because Richard Pace was trying to talk me out of reading his comic instead to read your comic. So good job.
But that was the one that Mark wrote, right?
Second Coming?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote that.
Yeah, I like that he was talking you out of one Mark Russell book into another, though.
He really believed in Red Sonja. Well, I have a patron question about lettering. And they were wondering, what are some common mistakes beginners make or should avoid when lettering their first comic book?
There's loads of like little things that so like there's like the crossbar eye, so you wouldn't use a crossbar eye, which is the sort of traditional capital I you would imagine. You wouldn't use that in like the middle of the word, and you only use it for pronouns really, for like I'm, I'll, I. And you sort of see that quite a lot, like in the middle of words, especially if someone in the script has written it in like capitals, like if there's someone shouting or something, and you copy and paste it, you'll see it like in the middle of a word, and it just could, to me, it looks kind of weird. There's stuff like tails, like the thickness of tails when they connect to the balloon being odd sizes, which is also like a little thing that, my thing about these rules is like you do want to abide by them, but also I tend to wonder how much they really impact someone. I think the most obvious things for me, I suppose, would be like sort of font size, font style, and balloon style. I'm not a big fan of like straight line tails, like where it's just two straight lines as like a almost like an arrowhead, because that always just feels to me like it's gonna like poke someone in the face or something. Mm-hmm. That and font, there's like a bunch of fonts that you see that I guess because they're the free ones from like Blambot, so like Digistrip, it gets seen, like I see that all the time. And also there's like I think it's like Anime Ace that Blambot does that you see quite often, and the Wild Words, the Comic Crafter one, which is like what they used on like the Wildstorm books, I also see a lot. So, but these I don't know if these are like good tips or just things that annoy me. So I don't know how much stock to place in those. But there's a really good like Blambot on. So Nate Picos, who's a letterer, has Blambot where he sells fonts and stuff, and on there he's got like a bunch of lettering tips and tricks and do's and don'ts, which are like just real good basic stuff to bear in mind, which are things like the tail thickness and things like that. But also I think for me it's just like, just look at the stuff that you'd like. Just look at the stuff where either you haven't noticed the lettering or you particularly like the lettering, mm-hmm. and just try and deconstruct or work backwards to see what they do. Because it's so much easier to I think to just like make a checklist of like, well, what is this book doing that this book is also doing, and I like the lettering in both of those books. Like, what is it that unifies those things? And maybe it is just like they have a cool font, or the balloons are kind of an interesting shape or whatever. But like, I'm a big fan of deconstructing stuff and working and kind of like rebuilding it and seeing how I can put that into my own work. So that's a really awkward and terrible answer. The better answer to that is look up Lambot's website and go for his stuff. But and maybe don't use those three fonts because you sort of see them quite often.
I use this analogy way too much, and I think it's because I love basketball, but whatever, I'm going to do it again. It's I often think about things like this, like lettering as it's like in basketball, it's like there's a lot of different ways you can shoot a basketball. There's like the traditional way, there's like the way that everybody shoots it. Or like, like LeBron James does not shoot the ball in a normal fashion. Like even Steph Curry doesn't totally shoot in like a perfectly like traditional fashion, like a way that like is perfect. Like Klay Thompson does that. But anyways, but there's all different kinds of ways you can do it. Ultimately the result, like the end result is what matters. And it's like, if you have, I don't know. And you may be saying that I'm giving people horrible advice, but for a lot of this stuff, I feel like it's like it's less about the specifics so much as the impact you have on the read. It's like if it works, it works, even if your methodry or like the way you use it isn't necessarily traditional. I mean, look at Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. It's like or number 4 in particular. It's like a lot of people wouldn't have done all of what you all did, not just you, but like everybody on that team, but you guys did that, and it made it a more special book. I mean, it even goes back to the marketing stuff we're talking about, where it's like, you know, just because is the way it's always been done doesn't mean it has to be done that way. So it's like finding a comfort level for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think like I do think for lettering, like a good thing to do is just take a look at like something that you absolutely know is going to work, right? Which will be like like a Marvel superhero comic. That is 99.99% of the time is always going to work, and that is like a good place to start. And like, so if you can get something that looks like that and feels like that, then you're off to a good start. And I think once you've got a basic grounding in it, like I have no idea about basketball, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a go at building on your imagery, right? So like I imagine LeBron James do you say LeBron James is the one that throws in a different way?
Yeah, he's got not exactly perfect form.
Right, okay, but what LeBron James was taught was like he was presumably taught like the way to throw the football and just the basketball. See, I've ruined my sports metaphors already. He's taught a way to throw the basketball, and he probably just, you know, put his own kind of spin on it, right? He figured out a way that then worked for him, but he was probably taught a base model. Like ultimately, he probably still throws a basketball in a similar fashion to the way that everyone else throws a basketball. And so, if you can have the basic grounding of like, I know that thing works. Like I know that thing, like orange and teal, I know that's going to work for a grade on my film, but what else can I do with it but then take that thing further? And that's probably how I kind of did lettering. I looked at the stuff that made sense to me, and then I tried to do that badly, and I got better at doing that. And then I started thinking, well, now I'm kind of feel confident in this bit. Like, how can I push what I'm doing? Like, how can I take it to the next level? And so, yeah, if you can kind of deconstruct the very, very basic nature of it, then you can build on that. And I think even just trying lettering, but I do think a lot of good lettering comes from good artwork. I've had to struggle on books before where and that just goes back to when I talked about like getting angry at the mistakes that people before you make. But like there have been plenty of times where I'm trying to letter a book and the speaker's in the wrong place and someone's making it incredibly difficult to letter this comic, or a panel's particularly small for the amount of dialogue that's in there, and you've got to kind of come up with some really I say creative to mean bad essentially way of fixing it. So there's also things like that, and if you can kind of understand each of those processes, I think you'll have a good grounding in how to tackle that. That's slightly better answer. I got there a second time.
All right. Well, I'm not going to make you do another sports metaphor, but I am going to make you talk about sports again. So we're going to close with talking about football, or American football, I should say, because Haas is a Dallas Cowboys fan. So if you're not interested in sports, that's what we're talking about now. Very briefly, I have to ask you about the first game of the season for the Cowboys.
God, so good, right?
Because, so good. It's all a buzz about their new offensive coordinator who apparently knows how to use Dak Prescott properly. They got Ezekiel Elliott signed for forever for $1 billion, actually $90 million. Was it 60 guaranteed? So he rich. Dak is going to be rich soon. How do you feel about the beginning of the Cowboys season?
Do you know what the problem? The problem has always been Scott Linehan. Like for a few years, he was our old offensive coordinator.
Oh, it's horrible. Like it's just boring.
Yeah, I mean, when I can sit there as just like a guy with a couple of years of experience of watching American football, when I can sit there and be like, I know what play this is about to be, then an experienced full-time defensive coordinator for another team who's been watching tape for like weeks will easily be able to tell what that is. But we're just watching Kellen Moore's new offense and just like seeing audibles, seeing people in motion was absolutely mind blowing to me. There was a great play. I watched it like one of Baldy's sort of incredible breakdowns where he's just like recording the screen on his phone on Twitter and talking over it. Where he showed the screenplay to Zeke where he got like 10 yards and 3rd and 4, something like that. And there's like 4 bits of motion. He motions Randall Cobb, he motions Amari Cooper, he motions Jason Witten, he motions Cobb back again, and then they run the play. And we've never seen anything like that. And I mean, that's not even particularly interesting probably for most teams, but for Cowboys football, that was unbelievable for the past few years. And it's so bad. It's so sad to think like the years where I guess Tony Romo was basically his own offensive coordinator and just doing his own plays at the line, and like how much better we could have been with the greatest man that has ever lived, Tony Romo, if we had someone like Kellen Moore. You know, how old is he? Like a 12-year-old kid. Like it's like 1 year as a coach, and now he's an offensive coordinator. And I mean, you know, it's only the first week of football, and so with enough weeks of tape, people might be able to break down what he's doing. But like, this is clearly someone who knows football for a long time, right? He's like, his dad was like a high school coach, and you know, he's been around coaching a long time, so he's clearly got a mind for it. And I remember John Gruden's QB episode when he had Kellen Moore on, where he did like the nice backhanded compliment of like, you know, I don't know if this kid will be in the league for a long time, but he'll make a great coach. And so luckily, he's turned into a great coach.
Well, he was the backup QB for the Cowboys, and the funny thing is, I don't know if you saw this quote. I thought it was hilarious, where Kellen Moore was talking about it. He's just like talking. He basically said that when he was the backup, Jerry Jones could never get his name right. But in the very first game, he's just like, "Great job, Kellen." He's like, he finally got my name right.
Well, when he was a back, he was awful. Like he just couldn't.
Oh yeah.
Like, he was. I mean, he was fine. He was fine. That was probably the best you could say about him. But his arm strength was clearly not there, like at a pro level. But it was also just weird watching him throw a football left-handed, because I haven't seen that very often. But yeah, no, just watching him put people in motion. That was, and also Dak. Like I was watching that game, like I think it was like 9 plays before they ran it, and I was watching it like, why? What do they? Does he know what he's doing? I don't know if he knows what he's doing. They've just signed the best running back, maybe second best running back. Let's say best running back in the league, and then it took him like, you know, it took him 2 drives before they even ran the ball once, and which again was like insane for Scott Linehan's sort of 2 runs and a throw and see what happens, like mentality.
Oh, that's the most boring offense. Yeah, but I mean, the funny thing is, so I am, I think I've probably mentioned this before. I'm a New England Patriots fan, so don't hate.
Yeah.
But their offense is kind of like the platonic ideal of an NFL offense, because it is all motion. It's all about, doing all like the motioning to see what kind of defense they're in and everything like that. But the interesting thing is, it sounds like what they do is what Kellen Moore is doing, in that he's playing against tendencies. And that's like a huge part about NFL, or like really anything. It's like chess or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like if everybody thinks they're going to run it because they got Zeke, and it's like, from what I read, I didn't actually get to watch a lot of the game, but it sounds like basically they're putting Dak into the position of using play action so they can like play off those tendencies, because they're expecting them to run, and then using that to actually throw the ball deep, which is very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, you should watch I've watched the highlights like 1,000 times already, but it was it's just getting them to do something different, because I think this is the thing that you could see from Dak like the past couple of years, was that he would throw a lot of audibles at the line. Like he clearly could see things. He knew what he was kind of doing, but he just wasn't given the plays. And they never seemed to really trust him to throw the ball deep, which then led to a lot of people just thinking he couldn't throw the ball deep.
Right.
But he was just dropping beautiful passes. Like a touchdown he threw to Amari Cooper against the Giants was just spot on. Like, you know, you threw a couple of dodgy throws, but like some of those deep passes were incredible. And it's amazing when you get someone that can trust him. But I mean, he's had Kittner as well, right, this offseason, so maybe his fundamentals have got a little bit better. But it's just watching him take control of that offense when you could see him take control of a subpar offense. And, you know, we still made the playoffs and stuff. But yeah, so it's just when you can put like more weapons in front of him, and also having Randall Cobb seem to open.
Oh yeah, he's good. He's good. I'm happy he's there, because it seemed like he was kind of getting phased out of Green Bay, and I always thought that he had a little bit something more. And he seemed
I hated him when we played him before, but now he's the greatest man alive. Yeah,
that's the funny thing about sports. It's like when they're not on your team, you're like, this is my favorite player, or when I hate this player. When they are on your team, it's like, oh my god, I love this person. There's so many NBA players specifically for me, where it's just like they are loathed by me, and I'm just like, this person is a horrible, horrible person. But when they're on my team,
that's every player on the Patriots for me.
Oh yeah, we have 53 worst persons for you. Actually, I guess it depends. I mean, maybe if you hate the practice
and the
squad,
staff,
and the staff,
so
it's about like 100-ish people, 100-ish. Let's call that. They're out.
Even the people that work at the stadium, the janitorial staff, the caterer, everyone.
Oh man.
Everyone.
Well, you never know how far they are from helping Tom Brady deflate footballs. I mean, they easily could carry that into the bathroom and be like, "Just gonna do some stuff in here. Don't worry about it."
I don't know what Tom needs to get. Tom needs to get 4 games suspended again for anything to do with Antonio Brown. I don't know what it is. Maybe he texted him once. Something. There's some kind of collusion going on.
They're gonna find some tampering.
It wouldn't matter though, would it? You'll still win the game. So.
we have a rookie quarterback. It'll be slightly more challenging. I mean, I hope it happens in the first half of the season because we have like the world's easiest schedule to start the season. But
yeah, you get to play the Dolphins.
We have our first 8 games are against teams that did not make the playoffs, and the first 6 outside the Steelers are basically like Dolphins quality, and the Dolphins are, let's just say, a low quality. They lost 59-10 in their first game. But anyways, Haas, we can talk about football forever. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about panel by panel, Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott, lettering, and everything else.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Before we go, I want to give a special shout out to Sean Kirkham, aka Big Clutch, one of Off Panel's patrons, and in another edition of Big Clutch's Beast of the Week, where I highlight a creator or comic that blew me away recently. This segment will sometimes feature guests and sometimes not. This week, I'm by myself, and the Beast of the Week goes to Mr. Sinister, the first occasion in which a fictional character gets Beast of the Week. Mr. Sinister made his first real appearance in the larger Hoxpox story this week, and it was about as memorable of a moment as this series has had so far, which is really saying something. This comic has been awesome. This iteration of Sinister might not be every X-Men fan's version of Sinister, but my god, it is absolutely my version of the character. He was a fabulous, sassy mad scientist who is absolutely glorious, and he's the best. I love it. More Sinister, please. So shout out to the glorious Mr. Sinister, this week's pick for Big Clutch's Beast of the Week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Comics Hyphenate Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. You can find him on Twitter at HassanOE, and his work in the digital comics magazine Panel by Panel, in the YouTube series Strip Panel Naked, and his lettering in comics everywhere. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Andrew Nikovich, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Marco Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kukachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Panillo, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCree, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Knoll, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Chipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert Nicolo, James Kaplan in Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.